All right, guys. Well, here's the China video. And I've recorded this video 2 different times. Thing with me is I'm like really disorganized. So if I don't record something and upload it right away, there's a good chance it'll get lost. Good thing about that though is I have about, I don't know, 9, 10 different hard drives all on my desk right now. And there's probably all sorts of videos. I think I've done at least 10 videos that never came up. So I think at some point I'll just go through all of them and start uploading them. But anyway, I've had a rough last couple days, and I appreciate those of you that have patience with me. This is the $20 tier and up, so and I hate saying it like that. I feel like some fucking dictator, I'm like, shut up, $3 tier, you peasant, but it's true. The lower the tier, the less the support is. There's a lot of people that are in the sponsor tier, $20 tier, simply just want to support what I'm doing, and I really do appreciate that. Tomorrow, whenever I can go live, sometime before this month's over, I'm going to do the raffle. I can't say raffle on Patreon. I can't actually write that word because Patreon, like, oh, my vagina, it burns. I'm sorry. You guys are in the upper tiers. I shouldn't do that because I know that annoys some people. I always do that when I'm fighting with Karina. I'm like, oh, your vagina burns. She's like, your dick stinks. I'm like, oh my God. She like gets possessed. She gets really mad. She's like, and I don't know. And then she starts calling me immature. I'm like, why am I immature? She's like, because you said my vagina burn. I'm like, you said my dick stinks. She's like, your dick does stink. I'm like, your vagina does burn. And then, we're depressed. Or wait, what? We're not depressed. But basically, yeah, I'm going to start flying out once a month to visit a sponsor. More about me than the sponsor, even though I know that there's people that are in the $100 tier that are going to, eventually I want to come fly out and see everybody. It's more just, I've been on probation or parole like my entire life. And just the fact that I can jump on a plane and go see somebody is really cool. And I like connecting with people that support me. Eventually, once COVID dies down, right before the pandemic, I got signed with a public speaking agency where I was basically going to get to go tour. And, they'd like give me pineapples with whipped cream and I'd be like juggling them. They're like, whoa, that guy's not even funny. But I was going to like go talk to colleges, and it wasn't going to be one of those corny things where I stand up and I'm like, yeah, I used to do gay stuff for drugs. No, I don't. You ever see stuff like that? Like I always go to these auditoriums to talk to these like public speakers, and it's always gay stuff. Sometimes I don't even think they're a drug addict. Like, yeah, I smoked bud in college and I fuck guys. Did you fuck guys for bud? No. I just did it because I was in college and I was high. It was a bad time in my life. And I would go up on stage and I would talk about butt fucking conga lines, sex riots, all the immature stuff that loops obsessively in my mind. So I think at a certain point, though, I'd like to do events. Probably like $20 tier and up, or like maybe, I don't know, if I'm in like some central location, we can like rent a hotel and I can just be naked on some podium. All right, I'm going to get into the story. All right, so where we had left off last time, Jesus, I had to like go back on the video to figure out where we were. So you got to understand this. So I'd gone to China. I'm in China. I went there dope sick. And it started off right away where I like went into these misadventures, like trying to score. I ended up going into some really ghetto, like, I don't even know how you would describe that. It's like a plaza of ghetto-ness, if you know what I mean. And it's just like, I don't know. I mean, it's what you'd picture. It's like a third world country. It's the ghetto of China. And the thing is drugs are incredibly illegal out there. There's that picture that my dad had taken of me where I get off the plane and I'm wearing a backpack and it says drug trafficking is punishable by death in the Republic of China. That's not bullshit. Like if you get caught selling drugs, now what can selling drugs be? If you have 2 pills on you, say you have 2 Oxycontins or something, that could be considered sales. If you have 2 nugs of weed, like if you have a bag and you have like 2 nugs like broken up, that can be considered sales. Someone had told me that while I was there. I'm not sure chronologically if we're quite at that point in the story. But what had happened, just because it's been a while since I'd posted the videos, is I ended up going to this ghetto. Police found me there. They ended up giving me a ride to the hotel, back to the hotel. Now, I'm still dope sick. I see my dad. He's wearing like a long t-shirt with tighty whities on. And he makes a comment about prostitution there. You know, my dad has always been one of those guys that, you know, kind of like low-key advocates for prostitution and pornography. My dad always had like a nice porn collection when I was a kid. It's probably why I turned out to be a junkie. I saw porn. I was like, oh my God, that's what adults do when no one is looking. You know, I mean, I don't know if porn affected me that bad. It certainly made me a pervert. I'm not like disputing that with anybody. I'm a pervert, but I'm like not like one of those weird perverts. Like, you know, I mean, especially nowadays, there's like weirdos with like trench coats that expose themselves. There's child molesters, rapists. I've never been any of these things. I'm just a chronic masturbator, and I probably inherited that from my dad. I don't know. I don't think I ever told this story. I may have. And one of the problems that I run into when I'm doing episodic videos like this is I can forget the chronology because I'm trying to do so many different storylines at once, right? But let me take a little time out from this storyline for a second. Let me tell you about the first time that I got stoned with my dad, which happened many years later. But I think that it's important to go over just so that you have an idea of what kind of person my dad is. And if I've told the story before, I apologize. So fast forward far, far into the future. So the story that I'm talking about, when I was in China, I was 17 years old. This was in 2002 or 2003, something like that. And I went on to sell drugs. You know, I started dating Jenny. And at a certain point, we were living at this really nice duplex. And, you know, I was addicted to heroin. I'd quit doing coke at that point, but I was still selling weed. You know, I was selling pounds of weed. Back then, dispensaries for medicinal marijuana were a big thing. And one of the things that I did was vend. So what you do is, like, you know, there's growers that are up in Northern California. They give you packs, which are pounds of weed. You get like a 5-pack, a 10-pack, a 20-pack, 100 pounds is called a box. And say you get them for like $3,000 a pound. Like, say you're getting a 10-pack and each pound is $3,000. That's 30 grand. Maybe I'll take them to a dispensary and I'll sell the pounds for 3,300, you know? So I end up making, you know, $3 grand profit. And so that was like kind of like a side hustle that I had going on. Now, at that time in my life, my relationship with my parents was pretty solid. I was on the methadone clinic, so my addiction was still bad, but the reason that I got on methadone in the first place is because I was sick of waking up dope sick. You know, that happens when you're really strung out. I was talking about that with Jeff the other night. So when you do heroin, when you have like a really bad habit, you literally have to shoot up every couple hours. Well, that's a real problem when you go to sleep at night because you're invariably going to wake up dope sick because, you know, 5 or 6 hours have gone by. You wake up and you're just like have these chills, you're throwing up. And so when you get on methadone, the shelf life, the half-life is much more extended. So you do a dose of methadone, comes in liquid. Take this little paper cup full of methadone, and it keeps you well for 24 hours. That's very beneficial when you're strung out because I remember I used to wake up when I was like really in the throes of my addiction and I, you know, have the chills. First thing I do when I wake up is puke, and then I'd have to go kind of like stumble into the kitchen and put the heroin on this metallic salad spoon, throw it on the stove, kind of like cook it, watch it sizzle, draw it up, do a shot. The whole time I'm like throwing up as I'm cooking it. And it started just to be problematic. So I ended up getting on the methadone clinic because it keeps you well for 24 hours. Problem is they drug test you at the methadone clinic. And if you come up dirty for anything besides methadone, they don't give you take-homes. So in theory, when you go to a methadone clinic, they give you have to go like twice a week, and you have a lockbox, and they give you these little, it's like that big, but it has little purple methadone liquid in it. And those are called your take-homes. Now, they know that when you are at a methadone clinic, you're basically dealing with like degenerate drug addicts, like Chubbs, right? Remember Chubbs? Keanu Reeves, tweaker brother that goes and like dick slaps women. He's like, that's not sex offending. I'm like, that's the fucking definition of sex offending, Chubbs. So I don't care, I'm a 2-5er. And I mean, I was around a lot of pieces of shit like that during that time. But anyway, they know that people at the methadone clinic don't adhere to rules. There's not a lot of heroin addicts that are just completely docile and they're like, okay, you said not to do it, I won't. That's really just not in the constitution of a heroin addict. So they drug test you, and when you get dirties, they take away your take-homes. So when you don't have take-homes, you have to go to this clinic every single day at 5 in the morning. There's like a window from like 5 a.m. to 6 a.m. that you have to go get your dose. And since I was always getting dirty drug tests because I was selling heroin, I'm doing heroin on the side, I had to go to the methadone clinic every single day at 5 a.m. And you go into this waiting room and there's all these junkies in pajamas. Everybody smells like shit. If you don't smell like shit, you're like, that dude's a cop for sure. And on Saturdays and Sundays, the time for when they would dose you was later. It was like 7 a.m. to 8 a.m. So you get to sleep in a little bit on the weekend. What a shitty lifestyle, really, like looking back on that. But the point of it is that my mom and dad, my mom would pick me up on Saturday mornings at this nice duplex that I was staying at. Because at this point I had a lot of money. But this was like an opportunity for my parents to bond with me. So my mom would pick me up on Saturday morning. She'd take me to the methadone clinic, and then she'd take me out for breakfast. There were plenty of times during that period I was making a lot of money, right? My mom owned a greeting card store. A couple times she had gotten behind on rent. Believe it or not, this is in Santa Barbara, California, one of like the most upscale, picturesque places in the world. This is where Oprah Winfrey lives. Rent for her greeting card store was $12,000 a month for this little, like, she sold greeting cards. You know how many fucking greeting cards you have to sell to make over 12 grand to cover your nut? Plus she had employees. So back then, we'd go out for breakfast and I'd be like, hey mom, I got it. And I'd pull out a wad of hundreds and I'd just peel off a couple of them. Say the bill was like $90, I'd give $200 and I'd just be like, keep the change. And we were regulars at a lot of little diners, and the waitresses there loved me, even though I was really overweight, because the methadone makes you gain a lot of weight. So I was like bloated. I was really tan. I looked like a Guido thug, and I always wore like nice designer stuff. I just looked absurd. My mom would tell me, Ryan, you're going to go to prison if you don't stop doing what you're doing. And I'd be like, oh, mom, I have so much money, it doesn't matter. But then there would be times where she needed like $12,000 for her rent, and I would just give her 12 racks. There you go. But she definitely told me all the time back then that I was going to get caught eventually. So my dad would pick me up on Sundays, and we had a similar routine. We'd go out to a diner, and him and I would talk. Now, my dad always kind of understood the street stuff a little bit more than my mom. Like, my mom had an abstract understanding that I was selling drugs. My dad, on the other hand, has always kind of been in denial. It's interesting, if you watch the interview footage of him for my documentary that I had uploaded. I'm not sure which tier, but I'd imagine if this is the $20 and up tier that you guys have already seen it. And, my dad, they asked him about when I got busted. And my dad's like, well, it was a misunderstanding. He was strung out with his girlfriend, Jenny, and their roommate. They would pool their money together and they would drive down to LA, and they put their money together to get like a large quantity, and he just so happened to get busted by the feds. They blew it out of proportion, and he got a conspiracy case. Well, that's great, Dad, but he knows damn well that that's not true. I mean, I've been on how many shows, Al Prophet, Simon Rex, talking about it explicitly. He's heard all of those interviews. I've told him. The point is, and why it's interesting, is because he's kind of in denial about it. He thought that that's just a kid being a kid. No, it's not. You know, I was dealing with pounds of heroin. You know, I was definitely doing something that I knew that if I got caught, I was going to be in quite a bit of trouble. But it's interesting that my dad was kind of like in denial about it. But anyway, the point is, and why this has to do anything with China, is back in that time period when I'd go out for breakfast with my dad on Sundays after the methadone clinic, he started asking me for weed. He'd be like, hey, can you get a couple ounces of marijuana? And he'd always call it marijuana. And I would be like, Jesus, Dad, fuck, I know you're my dad, but don't talk like that. It's freaking me out. Yeah, I got you. I'd never charge my dad, you know. I'd meet him for breakfast and I'd give him a couple ounces. So one day, and now at this point in my life, Jenny had epilepsy, so she smoked weed regularly. I didn't smoke weed very often. Once in a while, maybe socially. A lot of the drug dealer friends that we had, because we were like in this scene with a bunch of other people that were selling drugs on pretty big scales. A lot of people we knew were making like $20,000, $30,000 a week. You know, people were driving Lamborghinis. It was a crazy, crazy time period. We had a few cars. I had a Lexus, I had a Tahoe, I had a Malibu, we had an Eclipse. And we all just had a lot of money. So when my dad would ask if I'd give him like an ounce or two, and he was saying that it was for his golf friends, you know, he's like, yeah, you know, the guys that I play golf with, they want some marijuana, and if you could give me a couple ounces, that'd be cool. So I'm like, yeah, okay. So I started giving him an ounce or two. And like I said, I'm not smoking a lot during this period. One night, I remember this very clearly, and if I've already told this story, I certainly apologize, but kind of gives you an understanding of how my dad is, like I said. One night, I'm at my duplex with Jenny, probably like 8 at night. My mom's out of town. My dad's just up at his house by himself. He calls me and he goes, hey, Ryan, do you have any weed? It's kind of late at night, right? Usually I meet up with him in the morning I think it was like a Saturday night, and I think that the next morning, and that's how I know my mom was out of town. It was a Saturday night because we would normally meet to go to the methadone clinic. Next day, my dad was going to pick me up. So I thought it was kind of strange that he hit me up that night for weed. He's like, do you have any weed? And I go, yeah, of course I do. Because back then I was vending, so I always had pounds of good bud just kind of laying around the house. And I said, how much do you need? And he said, I just need some personal. Now, throughout my entire life, I never knew that my dad smoked weed. There was a couple times when I was a little kid, I was probably like 5, 6, 7 years old, and I'd be looking through my parents' closet, just kind of being a little annoying kid, you know, looking through my parents' stuff, and I'd like open a shoebox and I'd find like naked pictures of my mom. I'd be like, what the fuck is this? And then there'd be like a little Kodak film canister full of like really shitty like 70s Maui Wowie. It looked like pencil shavings. And I'd be like, oh, that explains the nudity. My parents are drug addicts. And I'd like put the shoebox back in the closet and be all defeated. So I knew that my dad did smoke previously, but, you know, I didn't know that he was smoking as I got older. And when I would give ounces of it to him for his golf buddies, I had no idea that he was smoking it too, or that he smoked. And he's like, yeah, I just need some personal weed for myself. I was like, huh? And he's like, yeah, do you want to come smoke with me? Now remember, I'm not smoking a lot during this period of my life. I'm just like doing it socially here and there. But there's no way I'm not going to smoke herb with my dad. And just the opportunity presented itself, and I was like, I hung up the phone. I was like, yeah, I'll be right there. And I tell Jenna, I'm like, dude, my dad wants to smoke bud with me. And she's like, oh my God, so cool. And she like gave me like these party hats and like these little blow toys. I'm like, no, it's not that fucking big a deal, but I'm definitely going. So I end up bringing a bubbler, and I bring one of those volcanoes, one of those things that you like plug into the wall that's, it's like a vaporizer, but it blows up like a translucent bag, and you hit this little like black cartridge thing that's attached to the bag, and you get this fat hit of vaporized weed. It's called a volcano. They were like $600 back then. So I end up going to my dad's house, and he's like, did you bring the marijuana? I'm like, Dad, listen, you gotta stop calling it that. You're tripping me out. He's like, what should I call it? Grass. I'm like, Dad, no, definitely don't call it that. You sound like Willie Nelson or some shit. Just weed. He's like, okay, let's smoke some weed. So I end up grinding up some bud. I remember it was good weed too. It was probably like some OG Kush or some Trainwreck, whatever was pop. This is back in like 07, 08. And I end up putting some in the volcano and, you know, turning on the vape thing and filling up this bag with this kind of, you know, translucent smoke or whatever. So my dad's like, okay, how do I do it? And I'm like, all right, just put the cartridge up to your mouth and press on it, and it'll allow you to hit the bag. And you can get a hit of this weed. So my dad does, it takes this fat hit, right? The bag just kind of like disappears. And you know how it is when you're smoking out of a vaporizer. He kind of coughs up this like very, it's like kind of just putters out of him, this very feeble amount of smoke. He's like, I don't feel anything. So now I take a fat hit off the volcano. I'm like, you will. You just got a fat rip. So I take one and I'm stoned, right? And I'm stoned and now I'm starting to feel a little weirded out by my dad, right? Just kind of being stoned with him. I'm looking at him. He's like this hairy old guy. And he's like calling weed grass. And he's like, no, I'm not feeling it. We got to try a different way. So I was like, well, I got a bubbler. He's like, yeah, let's do that. So we end up hitting the bubbler. And now my dad gets stoned. His eyes slant. I'm like, hey, do you feel it? He's like, you know what I want? I was like, what's that? Lobster. I just start laughing. I'm like, okay. You want to go get some lobster? He's like, yeah, but how are we going to drive? I mean, he looked like he was on heroin or something. I was like, it's kind of scaring me. I almost felt like he needed treatment or something. I'm like, Dad, I can drive to go get lobster. That's not a big deal. He's like, oh, I don't know how you want to drive stoned, man. We could get busted. I'm like, Dad, don't even put that shit in the universe. We're not going to get busted. Come on, let's go. So we end up going in this car, in his car, and I'm driving. And I remember, you know, there's like an auxiliary cord, and I think, yeah, I had like an iPhone 1. And I had Pink Floyd Dark Side of the Moon. So I end up putting that, you know, on my iPhone. It's blasting through the stereos via my auxiliary cord. And we're listening to like Speak to Me, Breathe, like the beginning of Dark Side of the Moon. And I'm looking over and my dad's like, he's like nodding out. I'm like, Jesus Christ. I mean, the weed's not that good, man. And, you know, I'm not smoking regularly, so I'm really feeling it. I'm kind of like, you know how when you smoke weed and you haven't done it for a long time, you start kind of getting in your head? I'm kind of like tripping out already. And then my dad goes, hey, man, hey, turn down the radio. I turn down the stereo. I'm like, yeah, what's up? And he's like, don't you find it weird that they can show somebody getting their head blown off in a film, but they can't show penetration? He said it just like that, like where he's like gasping for air. And I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, yeah, I'm turning the music back on, you fucking creep. Turn the music back on. And we end up going to this seafood place, Chuck's. Same place that I went that first night that I got out of prison on my second term. That was like one of the best nights ever. Did Suboxone, went out, got drunk, ended up boning some chick that I've been trying to for a long time. It's a great night. Why can't I relive that day? Remember that from Groundhog's Day? Why can't I choose that day? So anyway, we get to this restaurant, and there's this girl that I know that I gone to high school with. I'm going to tell you guys this story too. Fuck it. We'll just make this a whole hour-long story because it's worth telling, and I don't think I've ever told this one. So there's this girl that I ended up boning, right, in high school. And she's one of those girls that wasn't pretty in high school, but she ended up blossoming into somebody that's not pretty now, but she was ugly before, and now she's just not ugly. It kind of like neutralized her. She went from like looking like a piece of clay, like all like some lot lizard, to just looking like a normal girl. And that's the condition that we saw her in when we were eating lobster that night. And she was kind of like weirded out by me. And I'll go into when I fucked her in a second. But I'd had sex with her probably 6 or 7 years before that. Probably right around the time that this China story takes place. And she's kind of weirded out that she's waiting on my dad and I. Now, my dad and I are stoned. My dad's sitting there and he looks like he's like a full-blown heroin addict or something. He's like nodding out and he's like putting the napkin, like he like tucks it into his shirt like a bib, but we don't have any food. He's just drinking like ice water with a lemon with his bib on. He looked like a straight pervert. And this girl comes up to me. She's like, "Oh, hey, Ryan." You know, and my dad notices right away that there's something awkward between this girl and I. So like we order, the girl comes back to bring us, I think we got like a beer or something. When she comes back to bring us our drinks, whatever it was, my dad's like, he's like, "Hey, excuse me." Like, he's like stoned and incapacitated at this point. He looks at her, he's like, "Excuse me. My son thinks that you're beautiful." And she just turns beet red. Now, little did my dad know that I'd fucked this girl before. And the whole thing just started being very, very odd. You know, she turns beet red. I turn red. My dad's like coughing. He's like wearing this bib. There's like pieces of lemon coming out of his nostrils. And I'm just like, Jesus, how awkward, right? So that whole point of that story is my dad has some perverted shit going on underneath there. That's what he was like when he was stoned on weed, and this is going to have a relationship with what's going on in the China story. But let me tell you about this other girl. Okay, really quick, and then we'll go into the China story. We got an hour. Come on, content's content. When I'm in the mood to say stuff, I may as well just go with it. So this particular girl, the one that my dad said that I thought was beautiful and just completely embarrassed me. And it was just, the whole thing was like perverted and odd, you know. First he had said the thing about penetration. Now he's telling this girl that I think she's beautiful, and little did he know that I'd had sex with her. So when I was in high school, when I was a freshman, I always slept with a lot of women in high school before I got really into drugs. That was like my first thing. Probably just because I was insecure and I was like seeking validation. But I had a lot more sex than most people that I knew in high school. I don't know. I think I was really insecure and I like made up for it by like trying to compensate for the lack of confidence by being like overly confident. Some guys would interpret that as arrogant, but some women interpret that as confident. And, you know, I'd always just like straight tell girls like, "Yeah, let's have sex." And like, people are so confused back then in high school that a lot of times that would work. Like, we'd be at a party drunk and I'd be like, "Hey, do you want to go for a walk?" And if we went for a walk, I knew we were going to have sex. And it's just how I was back then. There's this one girl. I don't want to say her name. Let's just call her Mandy. Okay? There's this one girl named Mandy. Now, this girl had the nicest ass I've ever seen in my life. Ever. Like, of all time. Right? It was like absurd. It was like the Kathy Ireland of asses while we were in high school. And she was like in a group of girls that, like, all of her friends were cheerleaders, but they all partied. The kind of like social scene that I was in high school was the druggie / partiers. Skaters. Skater, druggie, partiers. But I know in different parts of the country, that's like the dorky people. We weren't like the most popular people at the school, but we lived in Southern California. So like being in like the skater, surfer, druggie party crowd wasn't necessarily like a loser crowd. Funny though that a lot of those people went on to be complete losers. But it's not like we were outcast. You know, we were still going to keg parties every weekend. We had our own scene. And she was part of this group of girls that was accessible to me. I was just, you know, she didn't have a super pretty face or anything. In fact, her face was like, but there was something about this ass. I mean, I like had a diary back then and I would like write about it. I'd be like, "I saw Mandy's ass today when I was in the hallway and I excused myself to the restroom and I jerked off." You know, I like really wanted, and everybody knew, she knew You know, I'd be all drunk and I'd be like, you have a great ass. She'd be like, oh my God, that's sexual harassment. No, she was cool. She wasn't bad like that. And I wasn't like, I didn't do it in like a tacky way. It was like in a hijinks way, you know. If for a second I thought she was weirded out by it, I wouldn't have been like that. But I definitely like went out of my way to hang out with this girl, right? And I, you know, because when you like a girl in high school, the whole game plan is to like put yourself in a situation where you can be alone with that girl. So this one night, my boy ends up picking me up, and he had like an old Mercedes Benz, and we picked her up, some of her friends, and we ended up going to a party. I don't even think it was a party. I think it was just the kind of thing that there was like 20 or 30 people at a house. Like not like a big party, just like a big get together. Kick back is what I believe the term was when we were in high school. And we picked her up. I end up going with her, two of her friends, and this guy that I was with. This guy that I was with was like the biggest pervert ever. Like, he was just all about sex. Really ironic with him is that he turned out to be like a flaming gay guy. Like, he was all about girls in high school, and like I heard that he was gay now, and like I'll go to his Facebook profile and he has like S&M gear and like a red ball, and he's like getting butt fucked by like some like big guy in like a Mexican wrestler mask and shit. And I'm not even, I swear, you know, he like, and that's cool, like whatever, I have no problem with gay people. I'm just saying it's very interesting that he went that route considering who he was in high school. So we end up picking up these girls and we go to, you know, this get together. Now they all leave to go inside, and I'm with this girl in the car. My friend locks us in the car, and he's just like, oops. But now, you know, now that I know, he's probably like, oops, and he just locked us in there. I was like, oh my God, we got locked in the car. This sucks. And she's just giggling. I think we were already drinking like Smirnoff Ice or something. We were all, you know, we were pre-gaming a little bit. And she's like, now she for sure wanted to do stuff, because she's like, she looked at me and she's like, hey, if you could do anything in the world right now, what would you do? And I just start unbuckling my belt. It's like some porno shit. I start unbuckling my belt. I unzip my jeans. She puts her head down and the fucking car alarm goes off. It's like, brr, brr, brr. And she starts laughing. And my friend that had the Benz, he comes out and he's just like, you know, he like unlocks it, but it killed it. And I'm like, no, let's go back to what we were doing. And she's like, no, it's over now. And I was like bummed out because it was for sure going to go down that night. Fast forward 2 weeks later, yeah, probably like 2 or 3 weeks later, a month later, who knows? You know, in high school, time is like seems different than it does now. You know, it's hard to like get a grasp on how much time had gone by, but let's just say like, you know, a few weeks later or whatever, I end up going to another party that she's going to be at. I mean, like, this was literally like my ambition back then, was to have sex with her. You know, it was like all I wanted to do. It's all I cared about. Back then it was skateboarding, drugs, and fucking this chick with this ass. It was like epic ass. So I end up getting to this party, and it's at her best friend's house. Now, this is the girl that I saw when I was out at that restaurant with my dad. And this girl, I mean, I don't want to sound mean, but if you've ever seen Tales from the Crypt, she looked like the Crypt Keeper. She looked like a skeleton, right? She looked like Faces of Meth, but she didn't do meth. That's just what she looked like on the natch. She was hideous. I mean that in the nicest way. Just her personality's pretty whack too, so fuck her. But so she's having this party. I get there and they had Jello shots of Jack Daniels. So we're all drinking Jack Daniels at this party. I end up getting fairly inebriated. No, I mean, that's an understatement. I'm completely piss drunk at this party. I start going up to Mandy and I'm like, hey, and I'm like throwing my arms around her and I'm like going in to kiss her and I'm just being very belligerent. Now, there's guys at the party that aren't cool with the way that I'm acting. I'm being like really aggressive, and that's not even like me. It's not my personality at all. I was just really drunk at that party. And you got to understand, just, you know, to put it into context, that I had just had that experience with her in the car a couple weeks before that. So it was like, you know, in my mind, she definitely was interested and she was just playing games, which I'd come to find out later that this is all true. She definitely wanted me and wanted to have sex, but she's playing hard to get because that's, I don't know, it's just games that girls play until they're like 30 and then they're just like, fuck me in my ass. And you're like, oh my God, you're sober. And they're like, I don't even care. I'm old. I want to get ass fucked. You're like, okay, fuck it. And then you ass fuck and you go see a play or something and you like do the soft clap. You're like, this is great. She's like, so is the ass fucking. You're like, why are you talking like that? She's like, because I'm old. You're like, oh, okay. So I'm hitting on her and I'm being aggressive and people end up like getting me away from her, you know? And they're like, hey bro, like you're too drunk, go chill out. And I'm just like, all right. I end up like going outside and I'm just like sitting on this chair. I remember I had my hood on and I'm all mad because like basically I'm drunk and I like don't have a lot of control because of how wasted I am, you know? And I'm kind of like mad at myself. And I'm sure if you've been really drunk, anybody can relate to that. I was just kind of embarrassed with how I'm acting. So the night winds down. And back then my best friend lived with me. He drove this Mustang. He's the guy that when we were on mushrooms, his parents ended up beating him up. And my parents like pretty much took custody of him. So what ends up happening is he left the party with some girl. And I kind of stayed there because in my mind, I was like, okay, I'm going to close the deal tonight. Because I knew that the girl Mandy was going to sleep over with the girl whose house it was that was having the party. So it's like me, her, and like maybe like 5 other guys. And I'm just kind of like sitting outside and I'm waiting for everything to wind out and then I'm going to go make my move. She ends up going into a room with this guy. He was like the lamest. He was the personification of Blink-182. He wore like a choker chain and had like spiked hair. He was just some guy that you just hated. He's probably like a banker now. And he ends up going in this room with her and they lock the door. And I remember I like opened the door and they were laying in bed together. And he's like, dude, some privacy, please, Leonia. I was like, fuck. God damn it. And that's when I realized I had a drinking problem. Because if I wasn't that drunk, I would have definitely had sex with her that night instead of the Blink-182 guy having sex with her. So now I'm bummed out. I'm at this party alone. And I end up, like, I'm tired, I want to pass out. So I just end up, like, wandering into a random bedroom. And it's the crypt keeper's room. And so I go and, like, lay down in bed. All of a sudden, she comes in. It was like some scene out of a movie. She walks in, and she's wearing, like, a little nightgown, and she, like, puts her arm up in the door frame. And she's like, hey. I was like, and, like, I'm drunk. I have beer goggles. And she doesn't look like the crypt keeper per se, but she still looks like Jason Voorhees or something, you know, like completely unfuckable. She's like, do you mind if I sleep in here with you? And I was like, nah. I was like, I'm drunk. I'm just passing out. So she ends up getting in bed with me. And this is a little like queen size bed. She's wearing this little nightgown. And I'll never forget this. She goes, you know, I can be a bad girl too. And I look at her and I was like, are you talking about sex? And she's like, yeah. I was like, all right. Yeah, let's do it. Fuck it. She's like, okay, great. She said that. She's like, great. She like ends up taking off and going into this bathroom. I don't know what she's doing in there. And there's like, you can hear like pipes like getting thrown everywhere. She's like scrubbing her asshole out with like a fucking Brillo pad or something. She was definitely like washing her asshole or whatever. I don't know what she was doing, but it was gross. So she ends up getting in there, getting back in the bed, and she's like, do you have a condom? And I was like, no, I don't use them. She's like, I have a Magnum. And I mean, my dick's like this big. It's like throwing a hot dog down a hallway. So she ends up putting this on, gives me head or whatever, and we have sex. It lasts for like 10 seconds. And the whole time I'm thinking about Mandy. Pass out, right? It was like one of those things where as soon as I came, I was like, no, what did I do? Gross. Everybody at school is going to know about this. I go to sleep. I wake up the next day. Vague recollection of what had happened the night before. She's not in the bed. I'm all alone. I kind of hear talking from down the hall. And I walk in there, and her parents are sitting down at the kitchen table eating pancakes with her, Mandy, and the Blink-182 guy. And they're all like jolly. They're all just like eating and talking, and they're like, oh, good morning, sleepyhead. And I'm just like, they're like, you want pancakes? And I'm just like, you know, like plop myself down at the table and I start eating. And her parents are like asking me questions. They're like, so, Ryan, do you plan on going to college? A 4-year or a 2-year? I'm like, can you pass the strawberry syrup? I'm like, I'm just like, I'm such a dirtbag. And I'm not wearing a shirt either. I'm like in my boxers, and I'm just like smashing these like pancakes with strawberry syrup on it. And they're asking me these questions. She's all embarrassed at everything, you know, because she knows that we boned. Her parents know that we boned. I was sleeping in her room. And then like they're talking to me, I'm kind of toning them out, and I'm like, you know, I got to get going. And I'll never forget this. Her dad looks at me and he's like, oh, the old hit and run, huh? And I look at him and I look at her, and like usually she looks like the Crypt Keeper. That's when she has, you know, makeup on. She didn't have makeup on. She looked like the rock creature from Neverending Story. She was, there was like crumbs spilling out of her face. I was like, oh my God. And I remember just like, I like just took off. I like ran out of the house, you know, and I ended up like, I think using somebody's cell phone. I don't remember what happened, but somehow like my buddy with the Mustang ended up picking me up, and I'm like, hey man, I fucked the Crypt Keeper last night. And he was like, oh my God, are you serious? It's like, come on, man, don't tell anyone about it. He's like, dude, I swear to God I won't. Of course, Monday comes, everybody at school is like, Ryan, fuck the Crypt Keeper. And she's like smiling, and there's like crumbs coming out of her eyeballs. You don't know what the point of that story was. It has nothing to do with China, but just so you know, my dad kind of has these perverted undertones. And I apologize for wasting a China story with this, but we'll go back into China. So my dad is standing in this lobby wearing a shirt with his little tidy whities on. And he makes some comment about how I was out getting hookers, right? And I'm like, Dad, that's not what I was doing. He's like, let's go back to the room. So we end up going back into the elevator. And remember, I'm still dope sick. So my dad's like trying to tell me, he's like, there's nothing to be ashamed of with prostitution. Like, let me tell you about the first time I had a prostitute in Nashville, Tennessee, 1974. Nixon had just been, you know, impeached. He just resigned. And I'm like, you know, I don't think Nixon did get impeached. We end up getting into this like whole presidential thing, and my dad's like trying to lecture me about the dangers of prostitution, especially in China. And I'm dope sick, so it's like the last thing that I want to hear. We end up getting back into the hotel, and I remember I couldn't sleep, you know, and my dad's like telling me, he's like, you know, if you're going to get a prostitute, you should probably wear one of these. And he gives me like some like ribbed condom, you know, it's probably from like 1980 or something. He's like, you should probably have one of these. And he's like, if you want, I'll bring you to a massage parlor. I remember that he said that. So like after giving me this whole lecture about the dangers of prostitution, he basically tells me that he'll take me to a massage parlor to actually get one. I don't sleep. Next day, my dad wants me to actually go see a Chinese school. Now I'm still dope sick. You know, I'm feeling horrible. Don't feel like doing anything. And China's like one of those weird places where like I'd almost gotten busted the night before. So my dad has like this guy that speaks English, that he's probably like 22 years old, 23 years old. His name's John Woo. And he's like, I got this guy, he's American, and he's going to chaperone you because he speaks English, but he also speaks Chinese. he's going to take you to some of the elementary schools out here. Now, what's really funny about this is Avery, the editor of my documentary, we've been going over the footage. I actually post all the Taiwan footage. There's some of the China footage. This guy, John Woo, is on there. Now, I don't remember him being like a chomo, but Avery's convinced that this dude was trying to molest me. And so you watch the footage, which is, I've uploaded, I think, to the $20 tier, and you can see him, and he's like, yeah, you're such a pretty American boy. And like, he's like fully hitting on me. The funny thing is I'm dope sick. So I don't even I'm not even comprehending, but this guy was totally hitting on me. He's like 23 years old. Probably why he's like hanging out in China, because there's all these like weird American perverts that go out there to like molest kids. And there's this footage of him basically hitting on me. So he's taking me to like McDonald's. He ends up taking me to these schools. It was interesting seeing schools in China because they're a lot different than they are in America. You know, like every single desk has like a monitor, and then there's a teacher that like stays in this like broadcast room because there's so many kids there. A Chinese classroom has like 150 kids in it. It's not like an American classroom where there's 30. They broadcast it, and if there's like, the kids need anything, they press a little button, and you know, they end up, the teacher will come up and like give you specialized attention or whatever. So I spend the day doing that. I'm still dope sick. He's taking me around, and I'm like, hey, John Woo. He's like, yeah. He's like, what's up, pretty American boy? I'm like, hey, are there any like, you know, bad areas? And you know, John was like, what do you mean? And I'm like, you know, like any areas where people like do drugs and stuff. I was like, I'm really interested to see like what a bad area in China looks like. He's like, I know just the place. I'm like, all right, cool. So he ends up taking me to this, I don't know. It's like a park, like you'd see in New York City, or like Love Park in Philadelphia. And it's like a skate plaza. There's all these people skateboarding. There's footage of me skating at this place. It's where I do the nollie pop shove it, and I do the nollie lip slide, and I think I do the kick flip off like a 3-stair or something. And this is while I'm dope sick. So he takes me to this plaza, and he's like, if you watch, this is where the drugs they sell. I'm like, all right. So I'm like skating, and it's funny because you watch that footage and you don't realize that I'm completely dope sick, and the only reason I'm actually skating at this plaza is because I want to meet somebody that has drugs, or I want to like be in a situation where I can buy drugs, and I'm kind of just skating so that this guy doesn't know that that's what my intention is. I don't see any drugs being sold. It's not like going to Venice Beach in LA where you're going to see people exchange stuff. You know, it's just Chinese people skateboarding. I don't see any drugs getting sold. I don't smell any weed, nothing. While I'm there, I'm with this guy, John Woo, and I end up meeting a skater kid, and he's from the United States. He was from, I want to say he's from like Connecticut or something. And he was probably like a year or two older than me. I was probably 17. He was like 18 or 19. So he's skating, and we start, you know, like a conversation, and we're talking about skateboarding. And, you know, I'm like dripping sweat, and I'm like, look, man, do you know anywhere around here where I can get drugs? He's like, what kind of drugs are you looking for? Now, he had the same situation, but he actually lived there. I guess like his dad had moved them out there or whatever. So this kid had been in China for a while. I think he's from Connecticut, I want to say, somewhere on the East Coast. And I told him that I was basically didn't feel well because I was addicted to painkillers. I needed painkillers or opium or whatever. And he's telling me that he could take me to an opium den. I'm like, really? He's like, yeah. He's like, in fact, he's like, I got this girl that I've been seeing, and she goes to the opium dens, and you know, you can do your thing there. He's like, why don't we meet up with her? But I was with this guy, John Woo. So I basically had to tell John Woo that I was going to hang out with the skater guy. And this guy, John Woo, wanted to butt fuck me. So he was all like super depressed about it. So anyway, so I end up hanging out with this kid. I forget what his name was. I think it was Pete. I'm almost positive that the kid's name was Pete. And he was from somewhere on the East Coast, probably Connecticut. And he had been there, I think he'd been there like a year. So he kind of knew what the get down was in China. And he ends up bringing me to meet his girlfriend. Now, his girlfriend is Asian, and she has an Asian girl with her. And one of the interesting things about being in China when you're American, I don't know if I've touched on this, is I'd be walking around as a white kid and girls would come up to me, put their arm around me, and their friends would snap pictures because they thought that I was like a movie star or something, because you rarely see white people in China. That's how rare it is to see American. Of course, you do see them, but it's not that often. So when I was with this guy, people are coming up and taking pictures of the two of us together. And we end up meeting up with his girlfriend. She's Asian, and she's got an Asian girl with her. You know, it's like one of her friends. They're from China, but they both speak English fluently. I end up meeting up with them, and they tell me that they have like a flat, you know, like pretty much like a studio apartment somewhere that's by the city. And I explained to them that I'm trying to get well because I'm strung out. And they said that they'll take me to this opium den. But they're like, why don't we go back to this flat? We have some herb there. We can blaze it. And then later I'll take you to the opium den. She's like, I know where the best one is. And she's like, you can't really go around asking people in China where the opium dens are because you can get arrested for that. But they do exist. They're like some underground thing. Both of them were from there. So we end up going to this apartment and we end up smoking this herb. Like, so I'm actually smoking weed in China. And I remember being like really paranoid. This guy, John Woo, had just taken off. He was all like bummed out, you know. I really think he thought he was going to get in my pants. I didn't think that at the time, but Avery had mentioned it. And if you look at the footage, it is kind of apparent that this dude's creeping on me to some degree. So we end up smoking weed at this place. And the girl calls this, I guess she had like a friend that could get her into this opium den. And an opium den is just what you'd see in the movies. Like, you go there, sit down, and you smoke like out of like some bamboo pipe, and it's opium, which I have done in my life. I did at Burning Man, and then I ran into in China as well. So she makes a call. She's talking in Chinese, but while she's on the call, she's telling me that she can take me there, but it's not going to be until that evening. You know, and that we had to like pretty much kill some time. This is probably like 2 or 3 in the afternoon, you know, and we couldn't go till like 10 at night to this opium den because they are illegal. So they're like, you remember the movie Half Baked, how they have bodegas where it's like a storefront, but it's actually a place where they sell weed. And in California, with the medicinal marijuana industry, they had stuff like that for a long time. Like, you would go to, like, they'd have like these stores that look like hydroponic stores, but you go in there and they'd reek like herb, and then you just tell the person like, hey, I'm here to buy bud. They take you to this back room that looked like a closet, and that's where they sold the weed. Called bodegas. Same kind of thing in China, but it's with opium dens. So I have to kill this time. Now I'm still sick, and I'm hanging out with this group of people. We're smoking blunts and stuff, and it felt kind of good to be with a group of people in Asia that were doing the same kind of things that I had been doing when I was back in America. Like, it felt like I was hanging out with American people. The guy was American, Pete, but the 2 Asian girls weren't. And the girl's friend was like real, like, you know, she was like rubbing up on me, and she was like holding my hand, and I could tell she wanted to hook up with me, but I was way too dope sick to do it. And my dad had mentioned the whole thing about like prostitution, which we'll get into because some weird shit did happen with that, but it's not the point of this particular story. So it's obvious that this girl's trying to hook up with me, you know, and like, I start getting this thing where I'm like paranoid because I'm in a part of the world that I don't particularly understand. I don't know if it's gonna like turn into some like group sex thing where like the Asian girls are gonna wear like dragon masks and start like licking my asshole, and then like the Pete dude from Connecticut's just gonna be like, you know what? When in China, bro, and just start sucking me off. I'm like, oh my god, no, Pete, I'm sick. And then like John Woo like busts in through the door. He's like, I want some too, you know. And it's like kind of like the nightmarish panic that you start feeling when you're in a place where you don't know anything about the culture. Plus, you smoke weed, and it kind of exasperates the existing paranoia anyway. So we blaze it, whatever, and it becomes clear that this girl wants to hook up with me, and I basically have to explain to Pete, even though they both spoke English, you know, it's just like an American situation. I'm basically telling him that I don't feel well, and I'm not going to feel well until I get the opium. Can like he tell her to kind of like get off of me? So one of the girls, Pete's girlfriend, is like, she's like, hey, do you want to go see the new Eminem movie, 8 Mile? I was like, you know, normally, and I loved Eminem growing up, and I still love Eminem to this day, but like being dope sick like that in China, it's like the last thing that I wanted to do. And so we end up going to see it. Anyway, so we have to kill time. And Pete's like, come on, man, I'll pay for you. You know, his dad was rich or whatever. And so we end up going to this movie. And I called my dad and I kind of told him that I'd met up with some Americans and that we were going to see the new Eminem movie. And my dad's like, that's fine. He was probably getting his dick sucked by a hooker somewhere in Beijing. So we end up going to 8 Mile, you know, and I remember like walking into it, we saw like some dog, it was like some canine, like just like hung by its fucking legs, like at a hot dog stand, and the dog was skinned. They were like serving dog. And we walk into the movie theater, and this guy Pete had already been drinking, what's that shit called? Soy, or what the fuck is it called? You drink it, it's a Japanese beverage, not even Chinese. Sake. He was drinking sake, right? And like, I didn't even want to drink because I was dope sick. I was just smoking the bud, which was kind of helping me. So by the time we had gotten to the movie theater, he was already buzzed quite a bit. So were the girls. We get into this movie theater and we sit down, and all of the previews are in Chinese. It's not dubbed. There's no American subtitles or anything. And I start thinking, I'm like, God damn it. Shit's gonna be in Chinese. Like, I'm already dope sick. I'm halfway across the world. And now I have to sit for like, it was gonna be like the longest hour and a half of my life, like sitting in this movie theater, having to watch an Eminem movie in Chinese, even though I'd never seen the movie. Sure enough, the movie comes on, it's in Chinese. They don't have subtitles or anything. And this girl starts rubbing on my dick. And I remember just sitting there and I was just like, you know what? Like, I'm so bored, like, whatever. So I'm kind of just like, put my hands on my, you know, on the back of my head. She's like putting her hand down my pants and she's jerking me off a little bit. Well, this guy, Pete, takes out a blunt while this is going on. So like, he's sitting, so it's like him, his chick, the chick that's jerking me off, and then I'm on the end of it. So he's far away from me and he lights up a blunt. We've been smoking blunt in this flat. Now he's smoking in the movie theater. And this is, you know, there's probably, I don't know, 60, 70 people in the movie theater. And he's like hitting it, and he had his hand on it. So he's like hitting it low key. He gives it to the girl, they take a hit. She's doing it low key. They're like blowing the smoke like below. You know, you're not allowed to smoke weed in the movie theater in China. If you get caught, you get killed. But finally, they give it to me. Now I'm already dope sick and I'm getting jerked off. So I like try to be all slick, take a hit, and I just go, and I start coughing. And it's like one of those things, you know, when you smoke weed and you start coughing and you can't stop. Started having a cough attack. And Pete's like, hey man, come on, man. And I'm like, dude. And there's like smoke everywhere. And I hand the blunt back to his girlfriend. The girl that was jerking me off takes her hand out of my pants. So they finished the blunt. That was the only time that I got to hit it. So we're like still watching the movie. I'm getting like really paranoid because now I'm even more stoned. All of a sudden, we're like, if you've seen 8 Mile, we're like to the part where he walks in and, you know, his mom is boning, Kim Basinger's boning that guy. I think it was like one of the scenes with the guy with like the weird teeth in the trailer or whatever. That scene comes on. All of a sudden the lights on the movie theater come on. And I look at Pete and he's just like, fuck. And I'm like, what? He's like, dude, just sit here and just play cool. I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, just don't say anything. He's like, if the military asks you anything, don't say shit. I'm like, the military? What do you mean by that? The lights are on and all of a sudden you see all these like Chinese military people come inside the theater. I had no idea what was going on. You know, I'm thinking it has something to do with the weed. And I'm looking at this guy, Pete, who is normally like very like confident, very like, you know, self-assured and everything. And he's looking petrified. And I'm like, what's up, man? And he's like, shh. And both of the girls, like, you know, they're both looking at me freaked out too. So I like, becomes clear to me that there's something definitely going on and like I'm possibly in a lot of trouble. There's these Chinese military people in there. They have guns strapped, you know, around, they have like the shoulder straps on and everything, and they have these guns. And they're walking from row to row and they're talking to people. But I don't understand Chinese, and I'm like, hey, what are they saying? He's like, shut the fuck up, dude. And we will get into the crazy shit that happened to me with the Chinese military while I was seeing 8 Mile on the next installment of the China video. I'm sorry that I went in on weird subplots on this video. I don't know. I was just feeling like telling those stories. So I appreciate you guys. Definitely more exclusive videos to come before the month's over. There's a couple more days. I'm going to put out more exclusive stuff. Appreciate you. Palabra.